It could have been anything, because really the art is a thing he likes. In a way, like he obviously he does all this stuff and he doesn't know what he wants to do, and then he finds this thing that he actually likes because he sees like the painting of the angel or whatever and that kind of thing, and like that's the thing that really affects him and changes him. When you have something that you like because you like it, not something that you like because someone else has told you to like it, however explicitly or implicitly that is.
Yeah,
that's when it starts becoming a part of you.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, and I think Blue Period does that pretty well. Fair enough, and I kind of understand why you like Blue Period. But that might be a good place to sort of start. I think we're gonna probably talk a little bit about seasonal anime sort of over the next, however long this is. But yeah, let's sort of roll intro. Hello and welcome to the Very Cool and Epic podcast. We are back after like 2 years nearly. Episode 3 or season 2 episode 1. I don't know which one we're going to go for.
It's a new season, right?
Yeah,
it's got to be
season 2 episode 1. Yeah, season 1 was really long. It had like a whole 2 episodes to it or something, and they can't be found anymore, thankfully.
have they been removed?
Oh yes, certainly they have. We're not going to address those in this one. I don't think you even listened to them, which is probably for the best.
I listened to like 5 minutes of one of them or something, and it was like cool. And so so I definitely should be here as a qualified member and long-term fan of the Cool and Epic.
Well, you're not only here as a qualified member, you are the co-host now of this season.
Yeah, I am. I can add that to my name.
Yes. Yeah, you can put that in your Twitter bio, right?
Yeah, I can. Co-host of
at Very Cool Podcast on Twitter. There we go. We've got a plug-in already. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh my! You're so good at this. Holy shit!
Oh, it's amazing. It's like I never left. It's like I never left.
All this time, you've really been doing, one person episodes.
Oh, there's a solo podcast, the slightly less cool podcast.
Hidden away.
I haven't got a very amazing sort of Twitter handle for that one though. This is a shame. But yeah, I think we were talking about Blue Periods, but we'll sort of move on from that and sort of say. I mean, we're both watching a couple of seasonal shows. I think
yes.
I think one of the ones that we kind of talking about was Tactop Destiny, which
yes.
Yeah, it had a really good first episode, right? I think most people looked at it and thought, this is really well animated, this is really like interesting the way they've set up the world. I think I talked about like the first scene with you, like it kind of showed like a backstory of how the world kind of came about to be this kind of would you call it? I'd call it post-apocalyptic is kind of fair.
Yeah,
right?
I think it's a good word. It's not really an apocalypse on the scale of like huge meteor or something.
No.
Wiping out like 90% of the population, but it's definitely that vibe and that feeling of a.
Yeah, it's like something has happened and that has affected the world significantly, and now we're living in that world that has been affected. It's that kind of post-apocalyptic story, but the kind of the setup for that was like, I mean, it's just like a really nice nostalgic vibe that I got from it that kind of reminded me a little bit, and I'm going to do this thing again where I compare everything to Mario Galaxy, but it was a Mario Galaxy like vibe with the kind of the storybook like space idea that they were having in that first scene, and I really liked it. And obviously the first episode, the action was done really well.
It was brilliant, and the idea as well of like, here are these creatures which hate rhythm and music is a really interesting one, and then they'll hunt out humans making rhythm and music type thing.
Yeah.
And they'll hunt them down, they'll try and kill them, and then you have these people, these things which are capable of fighting back and destroying them, and they're the weird combination of human and other potentially human-like creature, which is weird and like an autonomous killing machine.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's a really cool idea, and you've got like a composer with like the music art thing, and you're like battling the things which hate music with, in a sense, music.
Yeah, well that's kind of what it is. It's like, at least maybe they're not defeating them by playing music, but they're at least presenting themselves in like, this is music versus someone that doesn't like music is probably not quite the way that I'd go about it, but at least it's like At least it's like, these creatures
Yes.
are like the antithesis of wanting to enjoy the music that we see. We see Tact enjoy the music, and these and kind of that's a nice little contrast. But that's kind of what we get in like the first episode and a half type thing, and it's like this is pretty good, enjoyable. I don't know if you thought much of the second episode, because I quite enjoyed it still.
I thought it was fine. I thought it was good. It was like, this is some backstory. We can kind of see where this came from. That's kind of cool. I like this. It's it's nice.
Mm-hmm.
We know where they're going as well. Like they're going to New York type thing. It was pretty good. It was pretty good. And you have, especially like because you've got like the kid who plays the piano, and then like it gives you a sense of what the world's like for normal people. People.
Yeah, definitely. It sort of. It's just, I mean, the sort of backstory bit, and we aren't going past episode 2 in terms of like content here, and we're being slightly vague, so it's fine. But but like some of the stuff that we got in that sort of backstory episode was like, oh well, we can see how the kind of the character interactions that we've had in episode 1, how they've kind of came about, how things have changed to get to this point, and also like the kind of shift that the world changing has sort of brought to our characters. It was pretty interesting to see that difference, but we've kind of had a few more episodes since then. Which I don't think I've enjoyed anywhere near as much as the first 2. I don't know if that's... Yeah, I think that's probably the same for you.
Bearing in mind I have yet to watch past episode 4. I will at some... I think it's probably up to like episode 7 or something now.
I think it might be at episode 7. I'm only one behind, but it's not been it's not been my my favorite series from this season.
It just became kind of more of the same, but somehow worse, in a way.
Yeah, I think some of it's the presentation. It's like, I mean, the animation not being as good as episode 1 is a minor thing, but it still adds to it, right? The kind of like, it does feel a little bit repetitive at points. It feels a little bit inconsequential at points. Some of like I wouldn't say solutions to the fight, but it kind of is like kind of workarounds. They're a bit goofy, which is fine. But I think the kind of distinction with the first episode, what made the action so fun, was that it was cool, and like we saw characters that were competent and good at what they do, beating people that they should be, and that's fine. That's cool. So when they're given a challenge, which is more of an actual challenge, it's like, okay, well, they might have to think, but like, don't make it the most obvious kind of cliche of how they're going to win this fight.
Yeah,
it's slightly disappointing. I think slightly might be an understatement as well.
Is it? Yeah, because it was such a good premise. It was such a good idea. It was so well done in the first episode, and then just downhill.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I guess is just you have the cool idea for a thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is cool. This will make a cool story. Let's try this.
So kind of like building the story around the idea, that they had for the narrative. I guess.
Which is it's perfectly fine. You take an idea.
It's like a way of doing it, isn't it? It's
like One Punch Man, right? Is what happens if we have a hero, and the idea is what happens if we have a hero who just annihilate stuff with one hit.
It is one very simple concept that the series can be built around,
and that's where you get your series. Bam, that's your idea. So it's similar to that. It's a very fun thing to do because One Punch Man is pretty good, right? It's really views may differ, but at least I think it's really good.
I think most people would say at least season 1 is really good, and then it kind of gets into like, okay, well, does it go off in the right kind of direction after that? But season 1 feels contained enough to say that it works. Like the idea works.
Yes, yeah, definitely, and it's perfectly fine to take like an idea, build a story, and then do that. But the I guess the issue in a way with Tact is you have this idea, you have the story, and the story is fine. It's like we're trying to go from place A to place B. Why? Because we need to train or something. We need to meet some people to train. I can't exactly.
I feel like I might have forgotten the detail with that. Yeah, I can't remember exactly why.
To meet the rest of the music art people and things,
That's
maybe train or
right. Yeah.
It's along this one. So there's your story, and the thing that's going to make that story interesting is what happens on the way there.
Yeah.
Like how you get there. That's where your interest comes in, and you can see they're going to get there. Unless you want to do some weird twists at the end and some, like maybe they're not going to get there. But generally, in your basic storyline, they go from point A, they go to point B. You know, they get to point B.
Yeah, but it is, as you say, it is the kind of the journey there that's the most
Yeah.
interesting. I'm going to use a quote because you know me. It's about you should enjoy the little detours to the fullest because that's where you'll find the things more important than what you want. I think that quote is from a really good series, and if you haven't watched
Is it?
Yes, Will, it's Hunter x Hunter.
Of course,
Yeah, it is.
It wouldn't be anything.
Yeah, it wouldn't be like, you know, the first 10 minutes, first 15 minutes of the podcast if I hadn't mentioned Hunter x Hunter already.
Yeah, that's true.
But no, I mean, the kind of the reason I bring that quote up is because it pretty much encapsulates that idea that you were just saying about, like, it is about the journey, the bits off the direct path to the goal that make the story interesting, right? It's
Yeah, absolutely.
I think you can say that about pretty much every show. It's not the fact that I say, you know, say in a sports anime, right? Like, it's not the fact that they start losing and they're nowhere near winning a league or a championship or whatever, or a tournament, and then by the end they win it. That's the journey and, like, the route and the difficulties they took to get there is obviously
Absolutely.
the reason you watch it.
Yeah, definitely. I think sports anime is like the bread and butter example of that because in pretty much all cases you end up like winning. The team does something there. They'll end up on top. They'll end up on the best. They'll end up winning. I think that's fairly standard. In some way, and obviously not all sports anime will conform to that. Sometimes you have like the twist at the end where they don't win, and sometimes it's not really a twist. It's just if they had won, it would be so unbelievably unjustified.
Yeah,
The series
they
would
can't do it. They really
trash.
can't do it. Yeah.
Not even Remain brought themselves to that level. I think it's fine to spoil Remain because I mean,
Neither of us would recommend it.
yeah, it's awful. Once again, interesting idea. Well, not really interesting idea.
I don't know if I'd go as far to say it was an interesting idea. It was just an idea.
It's an idea that already exists applied to a sports anime. That's the interesting part. Is you're packaging something which has already happened and has already had lots of stuff done about it, but you're putting it in the context of a sports anime.
Sure.
That was what Remain was doing, and the idea in question was memory loss and like losing your memories for a period.
Yeah.
And how that like affects you and all that
Your
stuff.
kind of amnesia storytelling, right? Which becomes like fairly standard as like a trope in some series.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and I don't think I've seen it in many sports anime, if any, other than Remain. But I've not exhaustively watched all sports anime or read the description of all sports anime.
I can't think of one. I know there's potentially some sort of manga ones that have, I guess, more of a psychological sort of look at the sport, right? That might deal with that kind of thing, but I don't know any off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's true. It's possible there's some manga out there who have that as its contact. But yeah, not even, Remain like had the team winning at the end because like there's no way they should win at the end.
This is a Remain hate podcast, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, we've got to push the agenda. So, but the thing that I actually liked about Remain was that they lost at the end and they didn't win. That was good. But in general, with most journey like ideas of journey, you normally know you're getting to the end in some way, shape, or form. And if you don't get to the end, there's going to be a really justified reason as to why you didn't get to the end. It's going to make sense.
I'm going to use an example that you might not like, but My Hero Academia, which is not my favourite show, is not your favourite show, but it's one thing it does really well, which I quite like, is at the start of, I think it's every episode of season 1, they have that little bit which talks where Deku's saying, this is my story of how I became the greatest hero. It's like, okay, we know where the series is going. This is a good thing. We know where the journey is going. We know that it gets there because that was never really the question. And the whole focus then becomes on the journey and how he gets there and how he gets better at everything, which is the much more interesting bit there, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And my views on My Hero Academia have actually changed a little bit recently because I've realised something about it. But that's... Should we talk about this?
Go for it. Right.
So, briefly, my position on My Hero Academia has always been I really like the premise and I really like some of the character ideas and potential there. I think there's really good potential to do lots of things. But a lot of those things aren't done and realised because the topics in question are potentially too serious or too deep and the show doesn't really go into them. And one of those areas is death because no one fucking dies. You have like a ridiculous cast of so many characters. You know, in Class 1A, which is like the focus class at least.
You just want to kill children, Will.
There's 20. I I want someone else to kill off children for my entertainment. There's a very important difference there. But yeah, like that's the thing, is because the series emphasizes the villains and the seriousness of this, and this is the society, and you've got heroes battling villains and things. And my mind was like, this doesn't feel real. This doesn't feel serious. People aren't dying. And of course, I've realized I'm missing the fundamental point. My Hero Academia is really a anime inspired by sort of Western superhero comics.
Yes,
and
yeah,
in a
that's
lot of
definitely
Western
true.
superhero comics, like no one dies, right? If you think of the Batman and the Joker, obviously people do die, but like a lot of the time it's like the Batman can't kill the Joker because he has the ethical sense of not wanting to kill him. The Joker can't kill the Batman because, at least in the Dark Knight, the Joker says, you're too much fun to kill. You're too much fun to have around.
Yeah.
But in a general sense, a lot of superhero stuff, I'm no expert on this, but this is like my brief view on it, is generally what you have is you have the hero, beats up the villain and captures him and saves the day, and nobody dies because really you want that light-hearted happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're going for. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah, there are obvious exceptions to this, and we could obviously mention exceptions to this, but I think as a general rule that works as like as an explanation.
Yeah, that's it. I think as you go on with more time and stuff, you generally get darker and you generally get more real.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be a good thing, though. Like, realism isn't always really good. People read stuff to escape, or a lot of times people watch stuff to escape and be entertained and have fun, enjoyable hours of time. And that's what I think My Hero Academia does really well, is it does that part of the superhero trope really well, where it's basically a bunch of trainee superheroes learning to become superheroes and doing that. And that's what it does, and that's what it delivers. And it delivers, villains who have kind of simplistic motives in a lot of cases for some reason. Not always, but it depends how much you want to argue in favor of things, because you can always endlessly read into stuff. But it is that kind of simple thing. Nobody's going to die in it, at least not for a long time.
There's going to be certain deaths in the series. You can imagine there potential to be certain deaths in the series where it's like to leave an emotional impact in the end of an arc or something.
Yeah.
It's like that is the way it would happen.
Yes.
And that's fine, obviously. That's as you've been saying with the sort of the Western superhero movies. That is usually how that's done. If someone is to die, it will tend to be towards the end of the film.
Yes.
So you can have your emotional moment.
And it's also like, if you look at, I guess, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? If you look at the first Marvel films, they tend to be kind of lighter in tone than the later ones, like the Avengers Assemble and stuff. And I mean, that like a city is being murdered by aliens and things, but none of the superheroes really die, I don't think. But then if you look at like Endgame, or Infinity War, is it Infinity War?
Infinity War, yeah.
But you have the Thanos snap, right?
Yeah.
That like is completely different, because you kill off so many of your characters. And clearly the idea is like, how do we resolve this? That's what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
But because you've killed off so many of your characters, like that's huge. And you can very easily see, like, there is one clear option where they don't resolve the snap. They don't undo it. That's a very clear option. You can have another option where they do resolve the snap.
We have that reality in the form of like what the movie ends as like this is one reality. This is one version of the story where this is the end in a way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a lot darker in tone than the other stuff. I think even like Loki dying, right, didn't happen in the snap. It happened earlier, I think.
Yeah, right at the start of the film.
Yeah, exactly. That, for instance, wouldn't happen at the start of the earlier films.
Certainly,
I don't think.
Yeah,
just tonally.
At most, like that would be the big kind of lasting impact that they put at the end of the film. Even though it's Loki and he's usually been presented as a villain in previous Marvel installments, like it would still be something that because he's got that relationship with Thor, right? So they can still make it emotional even if he is the villain of the story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so they would, but no, as you've sort of said, like Infinity War was a different tone to a lot. I mean there are lots of ones in the kind of like that phase of Marvel where you had slightly darker stories. Civil War, for example, was darker than I guess the previous Avengers films before it. But as you were sort of quite rightly saying, the general trend was towards the
Yeah.
kind of the darker side, and I think that's fair enough to say that My Hero goes in a slightly similar direction to that.
Yes, definitely. Like in terms, of like Arc 1 and stuff, it's not too bad. With like learning, and I guess as it goes on, you do have things and into, I don't know, can't remember how far the anime's gone and how much is spoiler or not spoiler, but stuff. I guess the clear example is Sanaitai, right? Whatever he's called. Is that his name?
Yeah, so Night Time
Okay.
was season 4.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And like his death rate is, I think it's the first actual death that happens.
Possibly. We are now spoiling My Hero Academia season 4, so we should maybe.
This is an issue. How much time are we allowed to spoil?
This one came out like a couple of years ago, so this is probably just about fair game.
Okay, and the manga's been out for a while.
Yeah,
So,
the manga's. I think we're probably fine.
yeah. Well, I've done it, so we're fine. That's the policy I'll use, and I should try and catch myself before I spoil any other things.
Well,
So in AOT,
I think it was fine with Infinity War, the spoilers and stuff, right? Because because of how like culturally large that was.
Yeah.
Everyone knows about that.
Everyone knows
I
about
think
stuff.
My Hero Academia is another one where people have probably seen it if they want to see it by this point,
Yes.
right? So we'll let you off this one, but you gotta be careful, Will. You gotta be careful.
I will try and take more care. But that's an example, right, where the first death that happens in My Hero Academia, and it's going to be more impactful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, I know with Hunter x Hunter as well, you have like the graph of how dark the arc is in general, and that trends downwards.
Yeah, there's a general trend of. I mean, obviously, as I've sort of talked about with you at least previously, quite a bit, is how the arcs will vary in tone. There'll be a darker one, and then a slightly more light-hearted one, and then a darker one. But even so, at the darker ones do get darker, and the light-hearted ones don't tend to be as light-hearted as the previous light-hearted one. So the same general trend is like a slightly darker, slightly more serious one as the series goes on, which sort of makes sense. You're maturing with your audience, the same audience that started the series with you.
Absolutely. I think Harry Potter, although I have not read it nor watched the films, might be the best example of that.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I have read it and watched the films, and I can say that it's a very good example of that. Yeah.
That's definitely one that I feel like I've heard about, always would spring to mind. In terms of that's the thing that really did mature with its audience. And I think, but especially in terms of when the books were produced, right? I think, or written, published. That's the word.
Published is the word that you're looking for. Yeah.
Yes, it sort of lines up with the aging of the audience quite naturally.
Yeah, and that's really good. It's obviously really good that you've got that audience of people that are reading it and experiencing it coming out, and are able to kind of follow the characters properly. And it still works for people that watch it after the fact and aren't growing up with it. But there's just something special about that one audience that was able to grow up with it, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there will always be more stories that people will be able to follow as they come out and be able to kind of grow up with. So it's not as if it's exclusive to one group, but it does feel with an example like that it is just slightly special.
Yes, it's and for a lot of people it will stay with them. It will be dear to them. It will be one of those. In the same way you like the music you listened to when you were young. I think generally that's the music you end up going back to and that kind of thing. The same way that's a book series that will always be very special to a lot of people.
Clearly not you, but
no, and obviously now it's a point of pride that I haven't read Harry Potter.
You've got to make a point to never read it now. Obviously.
Yeah, exactly. Or watch the films. And all that kind of stuff, because it's one of those things in a way.
There are other things like that for you, aren't there? Was it you that hadn't seen Star Wars either? Or was that someone else?
No, I have seen Star Wars.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, we did.
Never mind then.
But I mean, there was at one point I definitely had I think a thing of like, I haven't tried Coca-Cola before.
Right.
Coke. Yeah.
You're just gonna make sure. I haven't tried cocaine since then, but.
No, I haven't tried cocaine. I think I have tried Coca-Cola at one point.
Oh,
I just use the word Coke and hope no one thinks I'm talking about cocaine. Which is not too bold an assumption to make. I think I did try it at one point, but I can't remember the taste. So, for the purposes of my memory, I haven't tried it.
right. Yeah, sure. Okay.
That works, right? That's
I
allowed.
think it works. I think it works. Yeah.
Yeah. But there are some things which are very easy to become like a point of pride in. It's a thing. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know.
No, it's difficult to know, really. It's difficult to know, really, because it doesn't really mean anything. That's one thing.
Yeah, definitely. It's just maybe you're depriving yourself of a really good thing solely out of pride and it's dumb, or maybe you're depriving yourself of a thing you wouldn't like anyway, and it's kind of it's a fun thing to do anyway. In that sense.
I guess so. Not that it's really particularly consequential in terms of your life in this example, but yeah.
Yeah. It does mean though, at least in the Harry Potter case, that there's lots of references people make that I don't get.
Yeah.
Maybe I've deprived myself of so much humour by not reading it, but.
No, possibly you got to read it just for the potential that a joke could come up and a reference could be made.
I'm still not going to read it.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. We're not here to try and convince you, but
no.
I think if you were going to read it, it might have happened by now.
Yeah. There's
a lot to read. There's an
awful lot. There's a lot to read. There's a lot to watch. There's so much choice.
There's so many different pieces of media that you want to engage with. I want to engage with. Everyone knows that if they have a piece of media that they want to get around to, but just don't have the time.
For me, that's Yakuza Japan. I can't wait.
Do you want to explain that just in case anyone doesn't know?
Yeah. So Yakuza Japan, I'm pretty butchering the pronunciation.
Yakitate, I'm pretty sure.
Yakitate, okay. Yeah. Is a anime which is a shonen anime about essentially a bakery and bakery competitions and working and making bread and stuff. It's a really dumb concept. It's probably a really dumb show. For some reason, it's on my plan to watch list. I don't know why. But at some point, I do want to watch it, and it's it's an in-joke.
It's long. It's long.
It's long as well. It's 69 episodes, which makes it even better.
That's a big commitment to get through if you are going in expecting it to be dumb.
Yeah. And maybe I'll try it and actually discover that it's really good. And the characterization of brioche across the anime is just such groundbreaking stuff that it's very novel. But yeah, we all have those things we want to watch and see and look at, and that changes over time. And in one way, I suppose, because there's more people producing more content. In general, there's more good content.
Yes, you'd say. I mean, what's the thing? 90% of everything created is bad, or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember if that's the statistic or
doesn't apply to podcasts.
Doesn't apply to podcasts. No, all of them are bad. Except this one.
Yeah, this one is good. This one's good.
Let me get that one out there. This one's really great, actually.
Yes. And I'd even go so far as to say it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Pretty cool. That's underselling it a little bit. I'd say it's very cool.
And epic, of course.
Yeah, and epic. Yeah.
That's what I'll say.
Yeah. I think. Yeah, I think one of the things I want to do, the media that I want to consume, is just this episode of the Very Cool and Epic podcast again and again. It's just watch it back.
Yeah, and where can we consume this very podcast?
I mean, that is a good question, considering I don't know how to put it on Spotify yet. But
we're so professional.
Yeah, I will hopefully try and work it out. Let's just imagine I've managed to get it on Spotify. Let's just imagine it will be on YouTube. It'll be on YouTube, and you can listen to it there, and hopefully on Spotify if I work that out. I don't know. What's the other one? People say Google Podcast.
Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts would always be available.
Yeah.
I guess, if you really wanted, maybe you could request us to burn it onto a CD for you. But I don't know if I have any CD drives.
We could sell physical versions of the Very Cool and Epic podcast.
We'll get it on
Why
like
not?
cassette tapes,
Cassette tapes. We'll get
punch cards,
merch that
all,
goes with it as
all.
well. Like
Yeah,
it's the whole ordeal now.
of course, of course. You can buy our very cool and epic podcast plushie or something.
Yeah. Oh, we need to do that. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, that's.
God.
Oh, I'm gonna milk the non-existent listener base for all it's
Yeah.
worth.
Yeah. So, to answer your question, probably just YouTube for now. But we'll get on Spotify.
Yeah, of course, we're doing this inside the podcast. Where if you're listening to the podcast, you already know how to listen to the
Yeah,
podcast.
you're obviously here.
Yeah,
If you're on YouTube, please like the video. I think people say that.
and don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, ding the notifications, check compulsively every hour. Other things that people do, I don't know.
yeah, they probably do that. And
Build a small shrine, worship daily, sacrifice 5 goats.
yeah,
All the work, all the works for us.
some fan art of me and Will would be excellent. As
Yep.
you can clearly see us through the podcast screen. So
Yeah.
you can get some pretty accurate drawings, I think.
Do fan art of like the audio recording, just bunch of squiggles in a line.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, this is incredibly focused. This podcast.
It is. That was the podcast plug because we're not sponsored, so we have to sponsor ourselves.
Yeah, we have to do like a 2-minute segment where we talk about our sponsor, which is us. Raid Shadow Legends have not approached us just yet, unfortunately. But
One day they'll go here.
yeah, what the other ones like Manscaped and Audible and those ones?
Yeah, that one was good.
They're usually on there.
What are the headphones ones?
Oh,
Yeah,
Raycons, right?
Raycons, yeah.
Yeah,
Common Squarespace is another one.
Squarespace. That's it. Yeah. All of these will come. You
VPN.
let's just expect a full sponsored podcast next time.
Yeah.
After everyone is alerted to the sheer quality. Should we get back?
We should let's start closing off the conversation trains. So we had the
right.
we
Yeah.
had the sponsor.
We
Right?
just
We
went
had
on a massive tangent about like My Hero and stuff.
yeah. That's the view on my Let's close the My Hero tangent. Because that's,
Okay, so running back like 15 minutes or something, we were talking about like tact mostly, but
Yes.
like we were kind of getting onto the idea of like it being a narrative driven story.
yes, it is fundamentally a there's the story. Let's make the story because we've got a story. Let's make the action army, which means the characters fit the story, right? Like you're making a story where you have people who conduct, and so they need to be very into music. So you make a character who's really into music, and then you're like, do we give him extra personality and extra quirks and stuff? Nope, he's just really into music. Bam, there you are. And that's partly why I think it's really bad. Is the characters suck.
I completely like agree with you. I think with is it Cosette? Cosette's the name, isn't it?
I think so.
The short girl.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's not fun to watch at all. But she's not fun to watch at all. I think with her, she has that quirk that they've given her, like in addition to like her role in the story of, well, she likes sweet food, but then it's like that's kind of it. That's kind of like they use that a lot as like she's gonna be eating a macaron or a donut or something, and then she'll talk about how she likes it, and then she'll eat another one. Like that's. What does that do? What does that do to the story? Because it's not characterization, is it? Like,
it's hard. Like, what even makes a character in a sense, in terms of a show? Because it's in one way, it's a group of sufficiently complicated traits and quirks and thoughts and sort of how they act type stuff, and that makes a character, right? But often it feels when you try and deliberately construct that, you generally end up with quite a small set of them, and you repeat them a lot.
Yeah, it feels like there's a type of character that your story has. And they'll vary by little quirks or little differences in certain bits of how they're set up. But I think, largely you get a lot of characters that are quite basic and quite samey almost.
Definitely.
I think kind of one of the examples that I was thinking about to do with that is like it's kind of like on the idea of what makes a character is if you've got like a character who's thinking something and like he's got an internal conflict and he's got an idea, but that's kind of only used to create the character and isn't really explored. So the example I'm going to use is in Erased, right? Because now the opening episode of Erased, and I watched this back on Friday, so it was like a pretty recent thing, and that's why it came to mind, obviously. But yeah, so the main character in Erased opens up with like a little bit of a monologue, and that monologue's like about kind of how he's sort of unsatisfied with his place in life because he's 29 years old and he's working at he's working a job that he doesn't think is where he wants to be because he's got aspirations to be a manga artist, right? And this is fine. This is good. This builds up an idea to his character and so on, right? And the idea that he's lacking in kind of a direction. But if this and we're talking about an idea here, if this idea isn't really explored much further, and it's just this character is not happy with his place in life, and he wishes he could have started doing things that worked towards his goal sooner, right? If that is just how the character's set up and not how the way the character's explored, is that good characterization, or is that it's not necessarily like it's not character focused, is it? It's
an interesting thing, really, because I'm often on two minds of this. Because one is I quite often hate unresolved stuff in stories because it's the kind of like Chekhov's gun thing, right? Where if you put a gun, in a room in page 4, you better use that gun in the story if you're explicitly mentioning it.
Yeah.
And I think this is more present in writing because writing, you necessarily draw the reader's attention to whatever you're writing, the words on the page. Whereas in anime or manga, you can have background stuff.
You got things in the background that you can notice, or you might put them there to kind of throw people off, especially in like a mystery story, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or it's just there to look nicer, to be more atmospheric, and to show that the world is like exists and is lots of different reasons why it can be there. But in anime and in visual formats, you're a lot freer for that, I think, if you want to do it. But it's that idea, right, of if you put in a particular characterization or a plot line or anything of that, and it's not resolved by the end of the series, is that a bad thing? Maybe. Like, on one hand, I can say, yeah, it is, because you're setting up all these things that are unanswered, and it's that kind of stuff, and it's not great. But on the other hand, it's more kind of real in a way, because you occasionally bump into people, maybe, and you have a conversation and you learn about something, or maybe you know someone for a little while and you learn about what's going on and what they're doing, and then maybe you just part ways with that person and you never see them again. And in a sense, they're doing something. You don't know how. Maybe one of them was trying to like start a charity or something to do something, and you have no idea how that happened, how it ended, how it got on. And that's fine, because that's sort of how real life is in a way, is unresolved stories and unresolved.
I think that's a really good point, to be fair, because there's always, and this is a kind of a quote from BoJack Horseman, right? But there's always more show. There's always more show. There's always the show can end, but there's always more. There's what comes after. What comes after the for the characters. They can have a resolution, but what comes the day after? And with this, it's like if the bit that we have where we look into the character's mind, if that's not resolved or corrected as such by the end of the series, that's not a bad thing. But it kind of, it definitely does mean, if it's not the focus, that it isn't a character or at least emotionally focused story, which is fine. Like, we've kind of already talked about why doing a narrative focus ahead of a character focus is fine.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, and definitely I think the sort of a bit of a thought on like the show always goes on type thing. Generally, I'd say you want the show to stop going on when the next thing about that character isn't particularly interesting or engaging or exciting.
Yeah.
Like, if you have like a sports anime about like a tennis player or something, and then the next part of the story is the tennis player retiring and just living his life however he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to be as interesting because you're watching the sports anime in part to look at the life of a tennis player, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you could make a show and continue it about this stuff, and you could pump it full of interesting things and those kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But really, the story's kind of ended.
Yeah. You're
and
clinging on to, I guess, the story that's
Yeah.
already been told.
Yeah, exactly. And it's probably better at that point. I mean, you could either one of two things happens. I think one thing is you carry it on, and it kind of sucks because you're still pretending it's the same story. Or the other thing is you carry it on, but you sort of mentally class it as a different story. And in a way, the previous stuff is kind of backstory. And maybe you have like a shift because it's not a sports anime at that point. It's like a completely different type of story. And it's fine to do that with the same character and stuff and pump it full of interesting ideas and concepts and resolutions and things. But it's very much changing, I think, at that point to a different story.
Yeah. And at that point it feels completely separate to what came before it. Even if it's not a different series as in and of itself.
Yeah, even if it's same characters, same world, same stuff. It feels kind of like a different story. And in some sense, maybe you could say it's different arcs, but I think there's
kind of a separate distinction with that.
Yeah, it's a big enough change.
I don't know if you have like an example of that you've read at all, or watched or anything.
I mean, I guess the closest that would come to it maybe is Ping Pong. In the last episode, it kind of does this resolution thing of like what happens next to people.
Okay.
But it doesn't really like settle on it. It doesn't do much on it. It doesn't continue it. It just says this is where people kind of ended up.
Yeah. All right.
Which is a really good way of doing that.
Yeah.
I don't actually have any. I can't think of an example that kind of carried on and she kept on trying to be the same.
Well, what about an example? I don't know if you've got one sort of here, but what about an example of a story that, I mean, the one that comes to mind for me is slightly different in scope to what we're talking about. But I mean, if you take Vinland Saga, you've got season 1 of the show, which is the prologue, and it's called the prologue, but it also feels like its own story. It doesn't feel like it sets up some other stuff.
Yes, I think the key with Vinland Saga is really in the name. It's a saga, right?
Yeah. It's
an epic story. And so, I guess in the context of what we're talking about, it being like narrative-driven type of thing, Vinland Saga is very clearly narratively driven because it's a story, and the story is going to happen. It's based loosely on like actual historical figures, and some of the things that they did, and that sort of stuff is inspired by that as a story. And so it's a story. It's set out to be a story, and definitely Arc 1 is kind of like it's put as the prologue, and it's self-contained, and it's still, I think, the same story as the later arcs because it's the same setting. It's a similar, I guess. By setting here, I don't mean it's the same setting in the world. I mean it's more of the same setting genre-wise.
Yeah.
It's a story about like Vikings and what Vikings do, and like the invasion of England in season 1, and in Arc 1 as well. And in like the later arcs, it's still about the Vikings. It's still about the characters, and it's about what they do, but it's just in a different sort of aspect of their life.
But so one of the things that you said there was that it's about the characters, but you still say it's a narrative-driven story.
Yeah. I think this might include mild spoilers for Arc 1, but we'll see how much I can try and contain.
Just keep it like a little bit mild.
Yeah. So I think very clearly in Arc 1 you have this story that wants to be told, which is like, because our main character is Thorfinn. He's the person we're really interested in, and we're looking in a way at his story. And so in a way we are looking at his character, but the story of Arc 1, right, is the invasion of England and the resolution of the invasion of England. That's the story in Arc 1, that's the background, that's the world, that's what's going to happen. And the thing we focus on is how our particular characters play into that story.
Yeah.
And I think if you took you could take Thorfinn, the same character, put him in this setting, right? And if he doesn't meet Askeladd in episode 4 or episode 5 or wherever it is, 4, I think. If he doesn't meet Askeladd,
yeah, I think it's 4.
It's 4 into 5. It's about there. If he doesn't meet Askeladd there, right, and he's just a Viking who meets someone else and does something else different, it's a completely different story. But you could still focus on the same characters. Askeladd is a really good character. He's an amazing character, but he's been designed to fulfill something in the story.
Yeah.
Because very broadly, Askeladd's arc is concluded in the first arc, right? That's who he is. He comes into the story pretty much as a complete character. He doesn't develop a huge amount over the season.
He doesn't. I think that maybe the distinction is he doesn't change. He's not, he's the same person he was at the start, at the end of the series.
Yes,
really.
That's a good word. Yeah,
but we learn more about him as time goes on. Obviously, which I guess in a way develops his character, but it doesn't. It doesn't mean that he changes.
That's a good distinction to make. He doesn't really change as a character. We just learn more about him. And definitely, like, a lot of what goes on in Finland is how you learn about characters, and sometimes how they change. Canute would be the prime example of a character who changes.
Yes.
Amazing in terms of the change and the distinction there.
We won't say what that change is or how they change, but yeah.
Very, very good one. And really, that change is definitely, like, you can focus very much on the character element. You can say, these are the characters we're looking at, but that change is driven in the context of the story, right?
Yeah.
If you think about what actually happens around that change, and the same with what actually happens with Askeladd and how he interacts with people, all those things together, they are sort of being dragged along by the story, and those characters exist because of the story. In the same way, like text, you have the characters exist because of the story. It's just in text the characters are trash, and in Vinland the characters are really good. And for a large part of Vinland, which is, I think, very similar to Hiki Monogatari in the same way.
We might have time to talk about that one in a little bit.
Yeah, but it's the same in the sense that it's this historic story that's being told and it's a historic narrative, but most of your time really is spent thinking about the characters and the decisions they make. And it just so happens that it lines up pretty nicely with the story because it's kind of been designed in that way.
So you say
it's a thing to do.
Sorry, you finish if you...
No, that's the thought.
Okay, so you say it was you say it was narrative driven, but I mean, at points, especially with Hiki, as you just mentioned, like there's a lot of focus on characters still. So there's kind of a distinction between the two there, would you say?
Absolutely. I think the way I would kind of view this distinction is that a sort of, I guess, character-driven story is one where you make a world, you put some characters in there, and then you go, what does this character do? Mm-hmm. And I think this is like more of a back-end type thing, right? Where it's how you derive your actual overall story is whether you focus more on the narrative and think this is the narrative I want to tell, whether you say let's take I've got really interesting character ideas, let's take these characters, let's see what these characters would do, and from the actions of the characters the narrative arrives. And you can blend these things, right? Like obviously,
it's not going to be black and white, right?
And it's probably a lot of both goes on at times. But I think that's one of the things is very clearly, I feel like, for Vinland and Hiki and some stories like that, you've got the narrative, the story you want to tell, you're looking at how the characters fit into that. I think also sports anime, as we've kind of mentioned, they generally have this. Like most sports anime, your narrative is, here's a bunch of people who play the sport, normally they learn it for the first time.
Yeah.
Or there'll be people who are learning it for the first time. Mm-hmm. Here's how they go on to win.
Sure. I mean, that sort of makes sense. I mean, it's a very sort of standard setup for a sports anime, right? I think, so it's exactly that for Haikyuu, right? We've got someone that hadn't played the sport, and he wants to pick up the sport and learn the sport, and so he does. And we follow him even as he gets better at the sport, and watch him try and stay on the court and try and win. Yeah.
Absolutely. But what makes Haikyuu good? Is it the story? No. It's the characters, right? No. It's the characters are amazing. But what the characters are doing and what the focus of the story is, what the story is driven by, is that narrative.
Yeah, I think what you said there was quite important because it is focused on the characters, Haikyuu. It definitely is. What makes Haikyuu interesting is seeing like Hinata and how Hinata wants to improve and how Hinata is I'm driven to improve, but you know what I mean. I'm not using it in the same way. He's driven to improve because he wants to be better, not because there's a narrative thing that's pushing him forward.
Yeah.
That said, the kind of the thing that is making the series go onwards is that we are following a journey from start to finish. You know, it's kind of a predefined. He is going from being new at the sport to he is going to be, you know, really good at the sport at the end, right?
Yep, definitely. And I think that's like one of the things is what makes a good sports anime is not where you end up; it's how you got there.
The detour as well.
Yeah, because necessarily, right, the thing that's going to distinguish sports anime, pretty generally, as a genre, is like the actual characters themselves.
Yeah.
And it's not always the case that you can have sports anime that are narrative driven. I think maybe Ping Pong is maybe more character driven.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I think there's still like a kind of narrative there, but I think a lot of the characters in Ping Pong and how they like their relation is you kind of are more interested in the characters, and I think that's why a lot of people sometimes say about Ping Pong is it's not really a sports anime.
Yeah, there is that group of people that say it's a psychological anime more than it's a sports anime, and I think this is the case with Real, which is the I believe it's basketball, the manga.
Okay.
I have not read it, so I can't really say too much about it. But
I haven't heard of it, so I can't say anything about it.
What I've heard is that it's definitely focused more on the psychology behind everything, and you're talking more about the characters and how they kind of act, not because of what's happening or whatever, but how they kind of act is the point of the series. Seeing their thoughts and that sort of idea.
Yeah.
And that might be wrong. There might be an overall narrative that Real is trying to tell from a start to finish point of view. I can't really say, but
yeah, I definitely think also the two are very intertwined as well, because quite often like you don't just start with some random characters in a random world and see where they go. You kind of have like an idea. You're like, here's this character, but you're not just thinking on when you conceive of a character of the base character. You might also be thinking of how they grow and how they change.
Yeah. So maybe an
they
example of
quite
that, and this, jumping away from sports for a minute, maybe an example of that where it's like there kind of is a narrative, but you know, but it's not really the focus. I mean, we've alluded to it, but Hunter x Hunter is I think you would say character driven as much as it is focused on them as well.
Yeah, because I mean, like the narrative really, right, is like Gon wants to find his father.
Yes, so that's the overarching narrative, which you know, exists within the series, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's like that's as much a narrative as it is a character decision for Gon.
Yes,
right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what ultimately kickstarts the story.
Yeah, and obviously it's going to affect why Gon does things, but that's both narrative and character driven. And I think for the other characters, right, that's very much more character driven than narrative driven a lot of the time, I think.
Yeah. So
based on what I've seen.
An example of that, and I won't go into spoilers, is Killua, whose entire kind of point in the series is finding almost where he's going to go, what he's going to do. He doesn't have a narrative like, you know, journey on it. Like there's not a point for him to reach other than looking at like the kind of characterization and the personal arc that he can go on to find his purpose effectively. And this is like, I mean, his entire thing is very much just focused around him existing as a character that is a friend of Gon, and then we explore kind of his mind and where he goes effectively, where his mind goes as time goes on.
Yeah, definitely, and I like, and that's one of those things, right? It's a very different kind of story almost in a way. It's similar in a lot of regards, but I think it's very much like you're focusing on the characters. I think you can have a narrative-driven story where you focus on the characters, but I think it's a lot harder to have a character-driven story where you focus on the narrative.
Because it doesn't. Hunter x Hunter doesn't focus on the narrative. Like, the fact that we're jumping between, the York New arc into the Greed Island arc and stuff like that. Like, they're all so separate. They're all so different. It's not a, and this isn't a criticism of my favourite series, but it's not a massively cohesive jump between arcs, because that's never the point. It's always about kind of characters doing things, and the focus is always on what is what is Gon gonna do now, what is how is Crollo, how is his exploration of himself gonna develop, how is Hisoka gonna act, and the narrative as such is just giving them a setting where these things can be explored further.
Yeah. And I think, although I haven't watched it all, I feel like that Hunter x Hunter could end without Gon ever meeting his father, and I'd be happy. Because I don't think Gon meeting his father, although it is like this overarching thing that kicks it all off, I don't think that's really the point of the series. The point of the series, in a way, isn't to conclude Gon finding his father, almost, to me at least, it seems. It's the stuff that happens along the way. That's what I'm far more interested in.
Yeah, it's definitely what's more interesting as well. Like, for me, that I should say, is just seeing how everything kind of changes, how characters grow or learn new things or whatever, right? As we dive into kind of elements of their psychology that we didn't understand at the start, and the series doesn't explicitly tell us, about. But just as we spend more time with them, we realize, there is something that is consistent through the entire series, but actually kind of only makes sense now that we've had a bit more time with him, and so I get your point. Like, obviously, Hunter x Hunter is not finished as a story, and potentially it will never be finished as a story. There is always that possibility, right? With Togashi's health and everything, and obviously, if it doesn't end, it doesn't end, and that is fine. But I think there might. I mean, this is maybe not related, but there's a difference between it ending and it not continuing, which is where it's kind of at. It not continuing leaves it kind of in a perfect place with the overall kind of idea behind the show being about these detours, effectively.
Yes.
Like, if the series reached a conclusion, which it shouldn't do. Like, that doesn't really work for something that is about going off the direct path from start to finish. I mentioned BoJack earlier. BoJack has a final episode. It has an end to the story. But I think the entire thing with BoJack is we don't know what's going to happen afterwards. The characters aren't sure how they're going to act afterwards. It's all very much a case of, like, this is BoJack's a character driven story as well. I know you haven't seen it, so you can't really comment on that, but it certainly is, and I certainly would say it like very clearly fits into that. But and it gets to the end, and it's like, well, end of the series. But easily there could have been another season afterwards, because there's more story to tell. There's more that we can look at the characters and see how they act next. But naturally, it has to end at some point, and so ending it at a point that feels like it's got more to tell, but there is a very clear distinction between now and earlier. Feels satisfying enough.
Yes, I think it's generally better to leave it on that point as well, where it feels like there's more to tell, rather than to keep on beating the horse and get every possible outcome you can get out of a story.
Yeah,
that I think runs it dry and feels a lot worse quite often. But you do still have to find that sort of natural stopping point, which is a good place. Because you can definitely end the story too early.
You can end the story too early. That's definitely a worry. And then there's the obvious worry of ending it too late. I
guess in the instance of ending a story too late, you could maybe retcon and say, actually, we're gonna delete this this last part because it kind of sucks. I don't know how often that's done though, but I can't think of an example.
An example of a retcon where it went back and thought we're gonna like not do it the same way would be Promised Neverland season 2, but let's like let's pretend that one doesn't exist.
Maybe not the greatest example.
It's not a good example. Well, it's a good example, as in it fits, but it's
Yes.
not an example of a good thing.
Yes. Not what we want, at least from
any story.
Yeah. I guess also an example maybe of this character-driven thing that's more prominent than Hunter x Hunter would be Sunny Boy.
Yeah. So, do you want to introduce? Because I guess a lot of people may not have watched Sunny Boy.
Yeah.
I appreciate giving an explanation of Sunny Boy is not really easy. But
so Sunny Boy was an anime that aired this year in spring season.
Yeah, I think it was a spring anime.
Yeah. And the premise of the anime is that there's a group of school children, like a class or a school, and they kind of split from reality and go into this sort of weird alternative dimension where it's just their school, and there's like blackness surrounding them, and they're very confused at first, and part of the story is like working out what's actually going on and what's happened. And in a sense, they're kind of split into this alternate dimension where some of them have gained superpowers, like being able to manipulate space, or being able to like create new paths to new alternate dimensions. And so really that's kind of what's happened. And then what happens in the story is how the characters act around this, right?
Yeah.
And what the characters do. There is some partial narrative component in like certain characters have certain abilities which help to drive the story forward, and you can see have been put there to drive the story forward. But a lot of it is like this kind of people doing what they do in that situation. And as a result, I think it's very confused. It's very hard to follow what's going on.
It is very hard to follow. If you haven't seen it and have seen something like Fully Cooley or FLCL, however you want to say that one, the style in which it's presented is actually quite similar to that. In that it's difficult to follow. Like the dialogues occasionally feels long-winded and difficult to keep up with. But it kind of leaves that impression on you. It's a weird series, but
it's a very weird series.
I think I really like it.
Yeah, I mean, also it's partly weird as well because it's doing an unusual art style. It's doing a non-standard art style that is kind of unique. I think I haven't seen stuff like it. Because definitely some of the things it does with simple colors but like light and dark shading is interesting, and why some characters even in like the foreground will be dark and some of the background might be light, and like it's doing all these interesting things artistically. I think it's definitely doing something interesting in terms of like some of the decisions to what to show in episodes. Like there's one episode which is literally this character talking about monkeys playing baseball for pretty much the entire episode, and
at least
we don't
15 minutes, right?
Yeah, it's a really long time. We don't really see the monkeys play baseball. We don't really know what the monkeys were before this. It's very odd. It's very strange, but it makes sense as a thing to happen because it's just kind of occurred, and we're seeing people talk about the event that's occurred. It's a thing that's happened, and
It
it's how
feels really candid. Like we're just in in the world listening to what the characters are talking about, kind of on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely is. And what's as well as another thing it does is it doesn't say when it's doing time skips. You have to infer when a time skip's happened. You have to infer how much of a time skip's happened.
And this can be annoying in some series when you're like not really sure where we're at narratively. Where you're at narratively. Yeah, I mean that does work, but in Sunny Boy, it's not the point.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter because it kind of it in a way it's like letting it wash over you. Is part of the experience, and I think that's what you have a lot of the time with these character focused stories is you just follow the characters and see what the characters do, and that's where the story comes from. And I think it works actually really well in Sunny Boy, and it's very interesting, and it makes you think about lots of the stuff, and it's some of the characters are in an interesting way actually. a lot of the characters are kind of interesting, but not hugely. And perhaps I'm going back on what I'm saying earlier about there not being a character-driven, narrative-focused show. Because almost Sunny Boy feels to me a little bit like a character-driven, narrative-focused show, in that you're...
I actually kind of agree with you there. Hold on. Like,
I'm just realizing it now. Like, it's actually really weird in a way, because aren't the characters, like, do they have really good characterization? Or... Oh, I pulled my headphones out. Whoops.
yeah.
Thinking about any of the characters, this is a high quality production. I'm thinking about any of the characters, and I'm like, do any of them really have like these really big character arcs or these really interesting developments and things? And
You could say the couple of the main characters maybe do.
yeah, like they definitely change over the course, but I don't think that change is. It's not like a kind of what's a really good example of a character development arc. It's, I guess, you could use like some AOT ones where the characters change like drastically.
Yeah, so an Aaron from AOT, for
Yeah,
example.
would be really...
Or some Hunter x Hunter ones, like Gone is probably the best example that I can think of. But
yeah, definitely. I mean, in Ping Pong, you have these developments that are really interesting, and like lots of anime have the stuff where the actual development of the character is really interesting. But here, in a way, it's not the focus. It's nice that it happens, and it's good that it happens, and it feels natural that it happens, because necessarily it's natural. It's driven by the characters themselves. And if
necessarily, a character is going to change when these things happen to them.
Yeah,
exactly. When they're put in this environment where they're the people that are literally driving the world, and what happens to it, then yeah, it is pretty obviously character driven, but
and has character development and things.
Yeah.
But like, you don't really focus on that kind of. You focus on the story and what the story's kind of telling you in a way.
I think so, because it's not focusing on a really cohesive start to finish narrative. We know kind of what is going to happen, and in terms of like where the series wants to go, and without spoiling it, it kind of does go there. It kind of does do exactly that.
It does that in a way, yeah, absolutely.
But that's all driven by character decisions in moments, and not every character does that. Not every character makes that same decision.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting is that part of the way we can realize how this occurs is when we think about like when we were actually watching it, being really confused by it and saying we didn't. I know you didn't really like it at first.
It took me a long time. It took me until the final few episodes to really feel like I got what it was doing and understanding what the show was, I think.
Yeah, and I think in part that's because it is kind of this narrative focus, and if you don't know where the narrative's going and you don't know if there even is a narrative, it's really hard to like it because it's trying, or maybe it's unintentionally trying, but what it is doing is it's focusing on that narrative, and we don't really know what the narrative is.
Because it's complex. It's a really complex narrative.
It is, and it's one of the things that I know you, and definitely I at least want to analyse more as a show, because it's doing a lot of interesting things. And there's lots going on. It's very convoluted and complex, and there's moving parts at different levels of how significant something is in the story.
Yeah. It was difficult to work out when watching it, which was the focus, what is significant. But I think looking back on it and reflecting, it feels like that it was really unique in its it being driven by the characters and focusing on the story as well.
Yeah, because the takeaway isn't what any of the characters did. The takeaway is what the story kind of was in a way. That's kind of what you take away in like the morals and the things in some of those stories.
Because that ultimately kind of was the part of the focus was on the ideas that had been grown, or the themes that had been developed, right? And we saw those are kind of like the character development bits relate to these themes and ideas, but that's also the narrative.
Yeah,
it's a
definitely.
weird show, but it's a weird show. I need to rewatch it.
Yeah. Oh, and it works actually as a really pleasant example, honestly. I was not expecting it to be that good.
That is an example of a type of a category of story we didn't think really
Existed.
existed. And
Yeah.
we've stumbled across it, intending it initially to kind of use it as an example of something else.
Yeah, but I guess it's another way. Yeah, it's a show that keeps on giving.
Yeah,
And
huh. I think I'd need to rewatch it though. Like we both said that it's worth engaging with again because we kind of know now where it is going.
yeah, and there's a lot of like things in there where I think you can take stuff away from it. It's trying to say stuff, or it's trying to put things in context. Like there's weird themes that relate to like parts of philosophy and ideas related to that, and all this other kind of stuff. And it's very strange. Even its premise of like splitting off into a different universe is not.
It's an isekai. Well, it's an isekai.
It's well, it's kind of done in the weird like approach from a quantum physics way, right? Of like it's just a probability type thing, and it's like a person kind of collapsing a wave function almost. I think is like kind of referenced nearly at one point. It's got all these weird ideas which by themselves are confusing. In an anime are even more confusing.
Yeah. It was more confusing probably than Evangelion was. And Evangelion's kind of your go-to confusing first watch of a series. It definitely felt more confusing to me than watching Evangelion.
I think also in part is because Evangelion has a lot of religious imagery, and I don't know how much actual like meaning that religious imagery has in a lot of instances. Like a lot of like the cross-shaped things and all this kind of stuff. Like it's just on a block of religious symbolism, and some of that religious symbolism is really meaningful, I think, but a lot of it might not be. Whereas with Sunny Boy, I have no clue if stuff's meaningful or not. I
can watch Sunny Boy and feel like I don't understand the philosophy of this episode. Whereas I think with Eva, it's pretty much a case of I can understand what is going on here. I can understand the ideas it's trying to say, but it took me a while. Like Eva took me 3 watches until I feel like I get it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really feel like I get it.
But you've only seen it once.
Yeah, I have, and I feel like I get some of it maybe, but I don't know. Like, it's very hard to know because a rewatch changes stuff drastically.
Yeah, and I think it kind of the difference between a narrative and character-driven story is kind of illustrated pretty well with the way we talk about episodes, right? I think I think when we were having a discussion of Sonny Boy, it was a confused idea of trying to work out themes and characters and that sort of idea. And then with something like AOT, we're talking about what's happening and where the story's going to go next. A lot more reflective of the character one.
AOT is actually a really good example, I think, of a kind of narrative-driven show, because it definitely feels like when you're watching it that there is this overarching narrative it's filling.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see that in a way with how parts happen. Like it starts off right with the attack of these. I don't think spoiling episode 1 is too many spoilers.
You're allowed to spoil episode 1 of AOT.
It starts off, with these Titans attacking, which is a weird thing to happen given the name of the show. But it starts off with those, and that's like an event that drives the stories, and you have your character response to it. But I feel like almost explicitly at some points, in some cases, nearly through the mouths of the character at least, you have events occurring to move the story forward, to push it along again, to push it along again, to push it along again.
Yeah.
And it's very much. I mean, it's still, I think, in part focused on what the characters are doing, because any story will be. If it's good, you have both narrative and character focus.
Of course.
They're both good developed parts. But really, I think what we're looking at is we're looking at where the story ends, because we don't know where the story ends. We don't know what happens next, which is why when you're watching it weekly, as you say, it's part of the enjoyment is trying to work out where it's going to go next. You're guessing the narrative. More than you're guessing like what the characters do, almost. You're guessing what the characters do because you're interested in the narrative.
Yeah, you're guessing what the characters do because that ties into what the story is doing, what the narrative is doing. Yeah, I think when we were watching, and we wouldn't spoil like events of it, but when we were watching the final season, or the the first part of the final season,
Mm.
one of the things that we were speaking about kind of each week was, well, why are they doing this, for what reason, as in like, where is it going to go, and that was like kind of like more leaning into that idea of, yeah, we're interested in where the story's going, even if we are reflecting on the reasons as to why the present is happening.
Yeah, definitely.
And as you
Definitely.
say, like, character ties into that, like
Mm.
in, you know, a specific character in season 3 part 2, it feels very localized though, actually. Like the certain characters are driven obviously by their thoughts and feelings and that sort of thing,
Mm.
and they will drive a part of the story, but
Yeah.
in that sense, that character exists so that that story can almost be told.
Yes. Yeah. Which isn't a bad thing, I don't think,
No.
per se. Because AOT is incredible. It's really, really good. It's really fun to watch. It's really fun to think about. It's an amazing
Yeah.
thing. But
Oh no.
you know what's coming.
I know what's coming.
It's going to be ridiculous, but I'll say it.
Say the statement and we'll like unpick it.
Yeah, it's too good. It feels like it's designed to be good, and it's really good, so it can't be good, which is a nonsensical thing. That
There's
sounds.
little picking apart we can do about that, because that doesn't make sense. So you're gonna have to try and explain yourself.
I think the best way of me doing this is an analogy, which I've found.
Okay.
And the analogy is you're having like a burger, right? And what AOT kind of does is it goes, we want to make the best burger possible. So we're going to control the environment in which we grow the cow. We're going to control the breed of the cow. We're going to control absolutely every element we can. We're going to use complicated science technology to make sure we've got like correct distributions of salt on the burger or something and flavorings in the burger. We're going to turn this into an incredible experience. When you eat this burger, you're going to be sat in like the most comfortable chair, and you're going to be like with the best bread and with all this stuff. Right? It's like designing.
I have no idea where you're going with this.
It's like designing the best experience. And so when you eat that burger and stuff, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But sometimes when you want to eat a burger, you just want to like sit down, at your local burger place or wherever you normally go for your comfort food, and just like kind of eat your comfort food type thing.
Yeah,
right?
sure, okay.
It's that kind of idea. And like you want it to be good, and you want it to be like natural almost. Just it's not the best it could be. Yeah, there's some weaknesses. Yeah, but it doesn't like it feels off somehow. AOT does, because it feels like it's been so constructed. It's been deliberately planned.
So I kind of get what you're saying there. So if I'm correct in asking this, is that largely that it takes away maybe from certain characters and certain character arcs potentially, because it feels like they're constructed in a way to serve a narrative?
I think that's a good way of putting it. I think it definitely detracts from some characters, where you look at them and you think, you're like, obviously every character is a construct.
Yeah.
That's how stories work, right there. Generally, they're fictional, or mostly fictional, and so they are constructs to serve a purpose. But it's quite easy to forget that a lot of times, and to become so immersed in the story that you can forget that they're a construct and you accept they're a real person. I think that's in part why people can get so attached to stories and to characters and to feel such strong emotions about them, because they forget they're actually characters. They think of them as real people.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point.
And I think with AOT, a lot of these characters, although like what they're doing in the story would be really good and is really like, they've got this great development and stuff, and they still feel like they've been designed to be human, and you can see the human elements to them, and like how they could be like real people. They feel almost over-designed. They're too perfect. They're too,
Yeah,
too
obviously not perfect in the sense of they're good people necessarily.
Yeah. They're too perfectly designed. They fit everything too well and things.
Everything fits together like a jigsaw, rather than a the mess that is a usual character within a world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it does. It's that sense of perfectness which detracts from the actual characters.
Okay, so I understand kind of what you're saying.
Mm.
Now whether I agree with it is a completely separate point.
I feel free
Obviously,
to disagree with it, of course. Yeah.
yeah. I think is that like an extension of why you don't think an AOT character could be one of your favorites? Like, because when it comes to favorites, obviously you have to have that specific emotional connection to a character.
Yes.
Um,
Um,
you can say, I think Eren is an amazingly written character, but he's not my favorite, and he's not one of my favorites. For example, I mean, I like Eren. I think Eren's a great
yeah.
character,
No, I think Eren is a really well-written character as well.
and he is one of my favorite characters. Whereas
And he's not one of my. Yeah.
yeah, so there we go. We've got it.
Yeah, there's definitely part of it. I mean, I think I definitely had for a little while as like Levi and Mikasa.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to remember if I've got the consonants in the right order there.
Yes, yeah. You're right in it being Mikasa an AOT character, but yeah, I think you're right in saying that she was at one point one of your favorites.
Because she was like so badass. She's awesome. She's like fucking cool as hell. Same with Levi right there. Also a really cool badass character. And I did really enjoy it. I was like, yeah, they're great characters and I like them. But I definitely don't think they are the same as many other characters. And I think that's true. I think the attachment to the characters isn't as connected. I think I'm not as attached to the story as well. Like, I can get really hype over OT when I'm watching it, and when I'm thinking about it, and when I'm like trying to guess what happens next.
Yeah.
But when I'm not, I don't get that hype over it. I can think about parts of it again and go, "That's cool story writing," but I don't feel that hype. Whereas when I think of like a part of Haikyuu again, you know, I can get hype for that. When I think of Vinland again, I can get hype for that.
So what's the specific difference? So obviously you say about it feeling constructed, but does that mean you don't think that it's character focused at all? Because we haven't said that specifically.
Oh, that's an interesting point. That might be a part of it, maybe. That could be.
So I think I can agree in saying I think a lot of AOT that we've seen has not been character focused. It's been it's been narrative focused as well as narrative driven. There's obvious potential for this to change, and I believe obviously with the next part we'll see a little bit of that. But it does feel interesting. It does feel interesting that it is like that, and maybe that is a reason why certain Haikyuu characters feel easier to have as favourites, perhaps with you, with me as well. I think I've got Hinata above any AOT character. And certain other ones I prefer as well to any AOT characters at this point in time, at least where the anime is up to.
I mean, for Hinata, at least for me, it's just because he's so much fun to watch.
Yeah, with you, and I think this is a question probably worth asking since we're on this topic. Who is among your favourite characters? Like as an example.
Okay, sure. So I guess on the top 5 list I have on my anime list, I can read out.
Yeah, go for that.
So my first one is Hinata from Haikyuu, because he's just incredibly fun to watch. There's so many hype moments. It's just
the story's also focused on him as well.
Yeah.
We
definitely.
see a lot of like his drive and determination to become better at volleyball, and
exactly. It's one of those stories, where he's the underdog at the start. He's got something that makes him special. He's like a non-typical character as well, which I quite like. He's that kind of thing of he's not your standard, like, I don't think at least he's your standard bread butter protagonist, but maybe he is because he's a short, energetic person who's happy a lot of the time, and that ticks a lot of the boxes.
It's definitely one that has never been done before, right?
But at least in the context of volleyball, he's not your standard volleyball player.
Yeah.
His benefit is that he's really quick and he's really short, and he's aspiring to be this thing that he's not got the genetics for, really.
Yeah.
Naturally, or the build for, and that sort of thing. So there's that kind of idea, which I quite like.
There's a very obvious obstacle for him to overcome. And that even outside the context of sports is a reason to get behind him.
Yes. I mean, in some ways, it's similar to My Hero Academia with Deku, because I do kind of like Deku as a character in some ways, because he's once again that character who's having to overcome this non-obvious disadvantage. In the case of Deku, it's a much worse way to overcome, because it's not really overcome by him doing anything in a way. It's overcome by him just being given a quirk and bam, bish bosh bosh, jumps your uncle.
It doesn't mean he doesn't do work, obviously.
That's true. Yeah. But the way it's resolved is kind of cheapened in a way.
I think maybe how I'd say is the way it's allowed to resolve more than the way it is
Yeah.
resolved. But yeah, no, I get your point.
Whereas with Hinata, like, he doesn't magically become taller, or anything like that. He has to work at finding, I guess, ways around that and techniques to overcome his height.
Another way to stay on the court.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's having to look for how he can do stuff to improve.
Yeah, and that's like one of the main things about Haikyuu is, I think he who wants to climb the ladder must begin at the bottom is a quote that's said in Haikyuu. And it's quite a good quote because it's all kind of encompassing with the series about this idea of hard work. And the series says explicitly that Hinata is talented in a way, but the way that, I mean, without spoiling, what this way is, right? It's really unique the way it does that. The standard kind of sports anime, talent versus hard work, and how they're kind of intertwined in Haikyuu.
No, I think they definitely are intertwined, and it's a very common theme in sports anime, that talent versus hard work, and like Hinata has both, but sort of the talent is in that like non-standard way.
We won't say any more on that because I think that revelation is perhaps one of the most interesting kind of parts of when it comes up.
I guess other favourite characters continuing is Askeladd from Vinland Saga.
Yeah, I think you have already spoken about him a little bit, so we won't dwell on him for too long.
Other than his complete character, he's amazing. I love him. Anyway, the third character would be Saitama from One Punch Man.
Okay.
And really, the reason why is because I love that idea of One Punch Man as a character idea. That's one component of it, but I don't think that would be enough to make him my favorite character, because you also have like the contrast between his awesome self and his like derpy self, which is really fun and is represented in an animation style and behavior really well. So there's a number of components there. Definitely largely one of them being like the actual character idea is a really cool concept, which I really like. And I like that concept enough to actually like season 2 of One Punch Man, which is a unusual position.
I don't know if it's unusual as much as it's...
Well, yeah. I feel like I feel like my ratings might be closer together than the other people have seen, but maybe they're not.
Okay, that might be true. Yeah.
Obviously, it's worse, but I still quite like it, simply because I like the premise enough to maintain liking it.
That's fair.
The fourth character is Kita from Haikyuu to the Top, which is the...
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I want to say on him because of like his appearance being fairly late.
Yes.
But there is, I mean, what would you say? What would you say makes...
I think, once again, he's kind of like Saitama in the way that he fulfills a particular role, or is a particular type of character, and definitely is serving kind of that purpose in a way in the story. And it's just, I think it's done really well, and I really like that character.
Yeah. It's a certain character archetype that the story needed. But there's also a really massive and clear way that kind of... the stuff that his character encapsulates and relates to, the ideas that he builds himself on, the ideas that the story reveals kind of through him, are so applicable to other sports, to non-sports in real life in anime. He is like an incredibly well-crafted character in being able to relate largely what the themes of the show are.
Yeah. And they managed to give enough of his backstory and stuff to make him still seem human.
Yeah.
And for him to make sense why he's there.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And that sort of thing. I think also, partially maybe because he plays a relatively small role, I think it's fair to say. That's not going to change much, or spoil much. He plays a relatively small role in the whole anime as a whole. At least he has so far. Like he's not going to stick around and get much screen time, probably, because lots of characters you meet in the stories are like that. And so for him to be well crafted, and like deliberately crafted, which is once again this idea, right, of being maybe too well designed as a character, because there's not much of him, it's fine. Whereas in AOT, you have some of these maybe too well designed characters that go on for a long period of time, possibly.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
But I'm not sure. I mean, my fifth character is Shida Shusaku, who is the coach in Bakuten. Who I probably won't be on there for very long.
I can't really say too much about this guy, but having not
seen
the show.
Like, so I can explain the show a little bit. Bakuten is a sports anime about rhythmic gymnastics, and essentially it tells the story of a person who randomly ends up watching some rhythmic gymnastics and is inspired by it and wants to do it himself. Classic sports anime.
Yeah.
He goes to the school, he joins the team. Just so happens they need 6 people. They have 4 currently. He joins, and one other person joins as well.
Okay.
That other person happens to have, won a national solo competition and is really good. So you have your combination of really bad person, really good person. The thing that makes the anime really special for me is it's so wholesome. Every moment is pure wholesomeness. There's nothing about it is unwholesome. It's just like a lovely, enjoyable to watch, feel good show in a lot of ways. And it's I mean, from a sort of, I guess, technical point of view, the show's mostly 2D, but it does some stuff in 3D, and I think that it does the 3D stuff really well for how it does it, and it handles it really well.
Yeah. I think obviously there are moments when we can criticise 3D in shows for looking out of place, looking a bit weird. But, from what you told me previously about that, is it doesn't feel weird.
It does it just during when they're doing the routine, so it's fine to do. When it does it, it normally removes the kind of background because you're in a stadium and it's gone dark, which means you don't have to deal with a weird 3D background or still 2D background that's clashing with like 3D models and stuff.
Yeah.
So it blends that really nicely and it works really well. And the 3D stuff itself is actually reasonably well animated. So it does that really well from a technical point of view. And it's a nice show. There's some very odd bits in it where it tries like different themes for like 10 minutes of an episode or something, or little bits of an episode, which is quite fun. And the reason he's on my list, this character, is because at the very end he has this speech, which is not in a way it's not good storytelling, because it's like kind of you should show not tell belief, kind of, in storytelling at least. Obviously there's different extents to that, but what he's doing really is he's acting as a guiding figure to these students and talking to them. And it was one of those speeches where or those moments where afterwards you just sit there and like you love that it's there. It's wonderful. And he's sort of representing a figure that's present in some other sporting anime as well, like Surune, I think, which is the one about archery. You've got these coach-like figures who often provide advice and have this kind of very calm demeanor to them of like these guiding people. And I love that character type, that character person, character trope, I guess. And I think in this particular instance, that's in a way that's what that favorite character is representing. It's not that he's great per se; it's just that the trope. I really like the trope, and he's a good example. And it's and he has a decent backstory. I don't know how spoilery this is. It's not hugely spoilery. It's a short show. People probably aren't going to watch it. But he was once a gymnast himself, and he was like that kind of very good gymnast who did lots of work, and the kind of like person who looks at others who don't have the same love and dedication to the sport or talent maybe, and kind of calls them out for it and says, you should work harder, you should do it more, type of thing. You should do more.
Okay.
Has those expectations of others that are the same expectations that he himself holds himself to. But eventually he gets injured, and then he performs with that injury and permanently damages, I think, his leg or his arm or something, so he can't compete anymore. And what's really interesting is the character change from an angry younger gymnast who's pushing everyone to perform to a coach who is like remarkably tranquil and peaceful and calm and very sort of collected and wonderfully giving this advice.
Yeah.
And what's some aspect of it that's really nice is you have the mirroring of this. You have one of the main character has injured his hand and wants to go and perform.
Oh yeah. Okay. Nice.
And you've got that image in there, and what the coach lets him perform, which is lovely. The coach lets the student make the same mistake he potentially did.
Yeah.
But he handles it as best he can. He says, you've got to go to the hospital immediately afterwards and all this sort of stuff. But he still lets him do it because he understands. Like, he understands he might be potentially allowing this young person to irreparably damage himself if something goes wrong. He's aware of that, but he still lets it happen because he knows he's been in that situation before. He knows how it feels. There won't be another opportunity.
He doesn't almost regret it either. Like, he knows what he's done, but
he's come to terms with it. He's come to peace with it, and it's lovely. And so he's one of those really just nice characters. And it's back then, it's really like an anime that kind of is when people talk about like getting like a hug or something. It's one of those type of anime where it's just feel good vibes the whole time through. And it's lovely.
It definitely sounds nice, and it might be one that I do eventually check out. But because
it's short and it's sweet, and I really like it. And it's not really focusing on that standard sports anime trope of hard work versus talent. It's there implicitly, as it will always be.
Because you always expect it to be there in some form.
Yeah, but everyone just like has a nice time, has a fun time. Even when like they run into their competitors and stuff, they still have an enjoyable time together. They still have a fun time together. And this kind of thing. Like, it's all great and it's just it's wholesome.
Yeah,
I love it.
Oh, that's good. That's good. I mean, the reason we mentioned about sort of your favorite characters was seeing how they kind of fit into your idea of formative characters made, characters formed to kind of serve the narrative of the story. Whereas I think a lot of those don't serve the narrative as much as they serve a sort of a unique kind of role in. Obviously, Saitama being a main character will serve the narrative. That is a natural kind of thing. But with ones like the guy that you just mentioned, the coach guy from with Kita as well, for example, it feels like these characters serve a kind of a more broad point about like themes and ideas in the series more than they serve the plot. They don't.
I think it's two things. One thing is they're there to develop other characters or to sort of put the message across, kind of, in a way, put a message across. And I think in the case of Saitama, he's like a character idea. So he's like the exploration of a character idea, which is why I really like him.
Yeah.
Whereas definitely, like, obviously he drives the story and the stories around him, but really the story comes from the, what if we have some guy who can defeat everyone in one punch?
Yes, yeah, certainly.
What happens? What do we get? And they make a story out of that, and you get your story, and it's nice and it's good. And obviously he drives the story because he sort of has to.
Yeah.
But still, I think it's really that exploration of the character, which is why I think season 2 is so much worse than season 1, because you've explored the character. You've done that. What do you do next? Where's next? Because that's kind of done. It's kind of why I think season 2 doesn't work as well. And you can sort of do more of the same, and you can try and vary it and other stuff. And he does get more development, I think, things, but it's not as good as the first part.
Sure, I understand that. Yeah, and it's definitely kind of how I felt. Not liking season 2 quite as much. I have got a question for you about another series though, one that we have both seen, and and kind of your thoughts on this whole character versus narrative bit. That series is obviously ReZero. We've got to get that one in there. Yeah.
Yes. We're doing our plugs. Just you wait until I talk about the characterization of the Panzer IV and Girls Buzz, and then I'll go to.
Well, hey, I'm going to skip over a couple, but I think ReZero is one that I'd like to explore because it is really unique in what it does, and there's a very distinct difference, I think, in what I see as the purpose of the series to what a lot of people see as the purpose of the series. I know when I've done writing and thoughts about it before, I feel like people have almost thought I'm coming out of nowhere with what I'm saying in terms of what I think the point of the series is. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts before I go into anything.
I mean, firstly, I think it's very much kind of narratively. Well, definitely, like all stories, you have your initial idea.
Yeah.
And with ReZero, the initial idea. I mean, how much are we willing to spoil?
I don't know what you're trying to spoil, but you can spoil episode 1. Like,
Okay.
you can spoil
Does-
episode the double episodes. You can say the premise, right?
Okay, yeah, yeah. So the main idea, right, is that the main character Subaru, when he dies, he starts again. He respawns.
Yeah, he respawns effectively at like a checkpoint in the video game,
Yeah.
where the characters that he's met since the last time he was at that checkpoint have they don't remember anything that's happened. It effectively resets back to that point, and he has to go through it again. He keeps his memories, but yeah, kind of everything resets, and we don't understand anything like how the checkpoints are set. We don't know if there's a certain number of, like, to keep the analogy going, lives he has.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the idea behind it.
The idea, and in a way, the story is kind of character driven, and it's like looking at what Subaru does. But I think also quite quickly he attaches to other characters, and the lives of the other characters are narratively driven, I'd say. I think.
I can understand that, yeah.
Based on season, like my understanding of the season 1, which is what I've watched. But at least from the perspective of Subaru, he's very much kind of character driven, I'd say, in what he's doing. He's just, he's been dropped in this world. What does he do?
Yes, it's very open to him in where he wants to go. So
yes.
Obviously him, where the decisions he ends up making, and the paths he ends up pursuing, people he ends up sticking with, decisions that he makes. And I guess in the sense, because of his ability, he has the capacity to kind of form the story around what he wants.
Yeah.
So in that sense, sure, I get what you're saying about other characters having goals and focuses, but I think that's quite just a human thing, right? The series.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the part of the narrative driven that I'd be kind of thinking about in a way might have been the selection process element.
Yes. Yeah.
That, I think, is, I'd say, the bigger narrative.
So I think you can say that is potentially the overall narrative of the story, although with all the time that we've spent with it so far, it hasn't shaped up that is where the story focuses on all that much. It can be, it feels to me much more like an overarching plot, like in Hunter x Hunter, which is why I'd certainly say it's a character driven story.
Okay, yeah. That's fair. It's definitely character focused, 100%.
It's definitely character focused. I think that one's fairly obvious.
I think I'd need to watch more to maybe be convinced, because there are times where there are definitely times where it feels like, kind of in a way, it's like things happen and the characters respond to them, rather than the characters set out and do stuff.
I think that is true. So I think an example of that would just be Arc 3. In the situation that Subaru finds himself in, and the things that he finds are happening, he has to respond to that.
Have I seen Arc 3?
You've seen Arc 3. Arc 3 is the second half of season 1.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's how that one's set up. But I think, I mean, with other things in mind, both things that happen in the story after the fact, and also kind of a slight way of reframing how that even comes about. I think it's all kind of it's still character decisions and so on.
Yeah. I think also, if I were to think about it from the perspective of the writing, I'd be more inclined to say it's character driven.
I'd always say the focus, and this is the hill that I will die on, but I always think the entire point of ReZero is about Subaru. I think, and it's why I think it had to be an isekai as well.
Oh yeah,
the way it wants to talk about Subaru's character,
yeah.
the way it wants the things it wants to deal with, and the parts of the story that the series eventually goes into with like as a person who is Subaru, and what are the things that make him, what are the things that are positive and negative about this. Should he have to deal with these things, should he, all that kind of idea.
Yeah.
They're all things that I think were the intention of Tape when he was writing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I definitely like, as I initially said, like it feels character driven from the Subaru perspective, and I think that kind of stays throughout. At least the whole of the first part, because it's really you very much see stuff from his perspective, at least I think.
Yeah.
And you have the same level of confusion that he does, and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
And so yeah, I think it's very reasonable to say it's about him. And I think a lot of the side stories about other characters and things are probably just because is it Tape?
Tape, the writer, yeah.
Yeah, he probably realized he liked this character and he wanted to write more about them, because you do just feel that way, I guess, sometimes in your writing.
I think quite an interesting thing about Tape is how he will just change kind of what his original intention was with time. Which I guess leans a bit more into this character-driven, character-focused bit, is that he's willing to add or take away things from the story. I mean, looking at what I'm aware of, what he wrote in the web novel, he wrote about a character in the web novel, and he was saying that he got lots of fan arts for this. Actually, his very first fan art was of this character, and he was like, "Oh, it looks like people really like this character. I'm going to change the story a little bit in this arc so that we can get more of him." And that was good. I know that he's added, from his initial draft, has added Arc 6 completely new. I have not read Arc 6 yet, but I know that wasn't in his original draft of the story, and and the web novel, obviously he was writing that kind of fresh for the first time.
Yeah.
And so he's willing to add things and change things to the story, because he wants to explore more parts of the characters ultimately.
Yeah, that's fair. And I now agree in hindsight. As opposed to what I said, it is character driven.
There we go.
Which yeah.
No, I just need to get you to say it's good. That's the next thing.
No. Yeah. I contemplated taking it off my watch list. Actually, plan to watch this the second part.
I mean,
maybe it's not even still on there. I don't know.
I don't really like season 2, part 2 that much. As in terms of what ReZero can do, it feels a lot weaker. Not the plot of it, just the presentation of it. And so when I get to that point in the light novel, or the web novel, I'm expecting it to be better.
Yeah.
But I'd recommend, if you're interested in it, probably reading it. Just because of the speed of adaptation and how much they adapt in the short space of time.
Yeah.
It feels like there has to be more in the light novels, and there is, from what I've read.
Yeah, and in general, I think some stories I prefer reading.
It's a sort of story as well that when you're talking about characters in this way, and a lot of it is like internal stuff, it's done so much better in written
Absolutely
format.
And one of the reasons I dislike it as well is because of what I feel are like trashy, in inverted commas, visuals in the anime. That's one of the reasons why is I sometimes feel uncomfortable watching it. Like, I don't know how much I like this.
I think this won't tell it to you at all, but the illustrator for the light novel, who I guess does the initial character designs for the anime, because they were done for the first time properly in the light novel. He was originally, I believe, a hentai artist.
That makes sense. I'm not surprised. And it is, it's fine. It's just it feels trashy.
I can understand that. I feel it's necessary for the story it wants to tell.
Not
all of it. Obviously, I'm not going to say every single bit that is your isekai standard stuff is necessary, but I feel it all adds to it. Adds to effect. I don't want to talk too much about this because all of this is kind of spoilers for later stuff.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's themes that aren't really evident at all early on, but
Mm-hmm.
but they are there. They are there.
Mm. Yeah, that's fair. Oh yeah, well, I'll read it at some point.
There we go. We'll take that. We'll take that.
In the future. I've got other things to read first.
That's fair enough. There's a lot to read.
Yeah.
Is there anything you're planning on? I mean, you said obviously you got the next few weeks of term.
Yeah.
What's the next thing you plan to read, or is it like finish Finland or something? Finish being catch up. You know what I mean.
Yeah, it might be Finish Finland. I definitely think I want to at least read the next probably 2 or 3 volumes.
Yeah.
I think I've read. Let me just check how many I've actually read. I want to say it's like 6 of them, maybe. Yeah, I've read 6. I've read 6 volumes. I think there are 19 or 20 that have been published, but like not all of them have been translated.
Okay.
And I'm nearly at the end of the second arc, so I'd probably read, like another 3 or 4 volumes. I suspect.
Yeah.
Of that. And I definitely want to read Blue Period. That's my primary reading goal, at least.
Yeah, I want to read Blue Period as well. I think we were kind of speaking about it just at the start of the preamble before the introduction. But Blue Period's, it's a show that I feel is, I mean, without having read the manga, it feels like it's better in the manga.
Yeah, same.
But I like what it's doing, so it feels like something that is worth checking out. And I will. There's a resolution there. But, yeah.
Yeah. Other than that, I don't know what I'm reading gradually, like just sort of random fiction books and things, which will continue. And there's some of those that I want to read.
Yeah.
Definitely, like my favorite book series is a new book out that I need to buy and read. And I've been resisting buying.
What is that? Just for.
So it's called the Cradle series.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of like. It's definitely fantasy. I think it's sort of genre it fits into is like not quite, but nearly like literary RPG. I think it's quite common in. I think it's like Wianjiang or something. I'm butchering that pronunciation completely, but it's like a Chinese genre.
I can't correct you this time either.
Yeah. But it's a lot of this genre kind of you have your character and a small group of characters who basically just go through the world getting more powerful, getting more stuff. A bit similar to an RPG, how
it sounds RPG-like.
Characters gain better gear and better things, and there's sort of a power system in there, and it's sort of that. But the thing that I really love about the Cradle series is how fast-paced it is.
Okay.
The first book is kind of a little bit slow, but fairly soon, like it advances so quickly. The plot does, and what's going on, and it's great. I always like things where the character gets better, and improves, and gets stronger.
Sure. I mean that makes sense as an idea, right? I mean we've spoken about like that being the case in Blue Period and Haikyuu and all these other ones already.
It's not too outlandish a position. It's really the basic proposition, kind of a lot of shonen shows.
Yeah.
Is this kind of growth of a kind of.
I can't believe
teenage...
My Hero Academia isn't your favorite, isn't your top 4.
Yeah. What could possibly cause that to be the case?
We've actually praised it today, which is quite impressive of us.
Yeah, we did. And I think I don't know if I explicitly said this, but I think the reason why I didn't like it was because I didn't want the superhero experience from it. I wanted more gritty realism.
Which is kind of on you because that's not the series it is.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I'm more willing to say it's not actually bad. It's just not what I want.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fine in a reason as to why you wouldn't enjoy a story as much.
Yeah. And the Cradle series, Um, it's got characters who are really likable and who feel really clever and feel really witty, and it's got, although you kind of know the main character's not going to die, because well, yeah, that doesn't really happen. And like the group of characters aren't going to die. There's still consequences to it and things. Like he still suffers a lot,
Yeah.
and people around them still die, and those sorts of things. And really, actually, the story starts where he is living in a small village, really, in a small valley in this backwater place, which at the time he doesn't know, but they're essentially a bit like ants in comparison to like a trigger robot, right? That's like the strength difference.
A Studio Trigger robot?
Yeah, like a Studio Trigger planetary-sized robot. That's like the power level difference.
Awesome.
And they didn't really know that, of course, but he sees a vision where his home gets destroyed in the future.
Yeah.
And his home gets destroyed by a being which is called a monarch, and they're like this really powerful person on the planet. And his home gets destroyed not deliberately; it literally just gets stepped on in a fight.
Oh, nice.
That's that's why it gets destroyed.
That's
and
really
so
cool.
that's like his goal is to stop that happening, is to save his home.
Mm-hmm.
And so he sets off with that goal to become powerful enough to stop that happening. And it's awesome because he just, it's going to happen in one way or another.
Yeah.
And it kind of actually has happened in the latest book. It's actually started happening, or not the latest now, but the previous latest book. It was actually starting to happen. He was achieving this goal finally. And also at this point, you know what's going to happen when he's done that, because there's more goals, there's more things going on for him to go and do.
Yeah.
But it's great how he gets there, because he sort of has this ambition for power and for growth that's unrelenting, and it's great because I love the series so much. Occasionally I'll just like sit down and go, I'm going to read the series. The next week is me reading the series.
It sounds really good. Like, it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, because it's so fast paced, and occasionally you have little bits where you're used to him. It's normally told kind of from his perspective a lot of the time, and occasionally you have scenes where you see it from someone else's perspective, and it's lovely to gain like this view of, here's our main character who we know is like, he's really polite, he's really humble, because he grew up being arguably like the least powerful being on the planet that's a human, pretty much.
Yeah.
That's essentially where he started from the bottom of the bottom. And so he's really humble, he's really like polite a lot of the time. When you look at him, he's like this huge hulking figure with like flames around him and burning red eyes with, all this stuff going on, and like he's intimidating as fuck, and he just can like kick down your door and has this huge power source.
Is it a power fantasy, Will? Is that why you like it?
No, I just like it that you have this character who you think is like nice and cool, and then you see an alternative perspective, and he's like a fucking deadly beast that could murder you. But you don't ever think of that in the series. You don't ever think it's like,
is it a kind of
cool.
Is it presented as a corruption arc?
No.
No.
He's still really nice. Like he doesn't do that. He doesn't actually murder people unnecessarily. He's still a good person generally and a good character.
Okay.
It's just he's just really powerful.
And in that case, it kind of sounds like some of the ones we've spoken about, where it's like a series like My Hero or like Haikyuu, where it lays out the idea at the start of where it's going, and then works towards that, and it's all about filling in the little bits and how he gets there is the kind of the journey. And I'm gonna bring back the quote, the little detours in life.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a mixture of things that make it really enjoyable. But yeah, it is kind of that power growth. And what's also interesting is sometimes he doesn't realize how powerful he is as well, and it's that kind of
that can always be quite good.
Because he changes so drastically, and yeah, it's an amazing. I love it. I love it so much. You should definitely read it. I don't have the physical books. Yeah, I've only got the ebooks, but I'll have to start buying the physical books.
Yeah, I mean, I've got plenty I want to read as well.
Yeah. The one defense I would say of it is I found it really quick to read, because like the actual writing style is really slimmed down. Like I think when writers will write, White even, I think when he writes the books, he ends up with a book, which I think is, I think it's roughly in the region of like 250 50k words maybe or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if that number's right, but he chops down like 20% of it or something in the editing process because he feels like it's too much filler and it's too much extra details and stuff.
Sure.
So they do feel like really slim, but like imagine Naruto, like but the opposite of Naruto. Like imagine you took
we
something.
Managed to get some Naruto slander into this podcast.
Oh, of course.
It did take us about 2 hours, but we got some in.
If you imagine the opposite of that, it's amazing.
You could argue that this podcast could be slimmed down by about 20%, but it'd be a little bit less cool then.
Yeah, and no longer epic.
No, you might have to take.
I think we're using epic in the sense of length, right? Not.
Lovely reveal there. We've held off on that one for a while.
Yeah, ever since the podcast started.
It's we've been building up to that though. There's been little hints that we've been throwing in. Along the way that you might have to rewatch re-listen to the podcast to get. Yeah, well, I mean that's cool. That's cool. I don't know. I mean, should we stop there? That might be a good place to stop.
Maybe. Yeah, I just realised I forgot what we were talking about beforehand because I've just been talking about the series and I really like it.
Yeah, we were talking. We kind of just got onto like things that we wanted to read and stuff right at the end.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's where it came from.
And that was just like a general kind of conversation.
Yeah,
but it might be a good place to end it. I think we should. It's been 2 hours.
That's fair. 2 hours is a good length of time.
Yeah, 2 hours is a good length.
And if the listener's still here, they'll probably be happy.
No one's listening to this, Will.
You might listen to it.
Oh.
That's so sad. God damn.
Yeah, we've got one person to listen to it, and it's you. It now exists, right?
It does now exist.
Assuming the recording's gone well, please.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I really hope so.
Alright, if it hasn't gone well, we'll just do it again, word for word.
Yeah, I have been writing down everything that we've been saying, so I do.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Well done. That's probably how you know what we've been talking about so well. Because
I have not been doing that. I apologise. I've written down the times of things I need to cut out of the recording. The toilet break and the cough and you drinking water. I thought maybe I could cut that one out as well.
Oh, sorry. I should have muted myself.
But we'll no, it's good. It's good. We've hopefully done a fairly successful first attempt at the season 2 launch of the Very Cool and Epic podcast. I don't know what to call this one. We'll come up with an episode title afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'll have a look at putting it on Spotify. But
I don't think it's going to be that hard to do it.
It's meant to be fine to put on Spotify podcasts. I think the fact that people can re-upload songs as podcast episodes on Spotify just is probably telling that it's not that difficult.
Yeah. There's no checking.
But yeah, I'll have a look and I'll get that.
Yeah.
We should probably do a little wrapping up.
Outro.
Do you want to go? Do you want to...
I have no clue how to end this thing.
Neither do I. So I think we just say thank you for listening. They've got already. They've got already.
If you're here.
If you're not here,
fuck you.
Screw you. Yeah.
Alright, excellent. We're in. I was going to say our listener base, but they're not.
There is no listener base.
Yeah, we're not insulting our listener base. We're insulting. I don't know.
No one.
Oh. No one.
No one. All right. Well,
No.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back one day